Welcome to Learn at Work, a webinar series presented by the journal Work, a journal of prevention, assessment, and rehabilitation, published by iOS Press in the Netherlands. We're very delighted to have all of our 2018 Learn at Work webinars presented in cooperation with the Human Factors and Ergonomics Society. Today, we have a very special presentation. Sarah will advance the slide to introduce our topic for today. We're going to have a discussion about parental awareness of school bag carriage. It will be presented by Sarah Dockrell and myself. I will just do a little of the presentation, but will be the moderator of this webinar. Sarah, advance the next slide, please.
Thank you, Karen. We're going to start off the webinar with Karen just setting the background for the school backpack awareness that she does in the States. Do you want to just take the slide, Karen?
Yes, thank you, Sarah. So I'm in Boston and Sarah is in Dublin, Ireland. We love technology. It makes us be able to have lots of cooperation around the globe. So over 20 years ago, the American Occupational Therapy Association recognized that there were some concerns about children, in particular, wearing backpacks. And they began to investigate the evidence literature. At that time, 20 years ago, there was not a lot of evidence regarding the use of backpacks. And so we began to do an educational outreach just to have children, their parents, teachers, administrators, and others get a little bit of a background of what they might do. But the evidence really wasn't there. And Sarah today is going to present on sort of a void in the evidence literature regarding what do parents know. Now, a lot has evolved since this 1980s, late 80s. And one of the initiatives that the American Occupational Therapy Association has done for almost 20 years now is to have a National School Backpack Awareness Day that now is currently based on the current evidence literature. And Sarah has helped to add to that literature. And today she's going to present on some research that was done on parents' awareness of backpack or school bag carriage. So I'm going to turn it over to Sarah now.
Okay, thank you very much, Karen. And similar to Karen, my interest has been sort of long-standing in this area. So I just thought we would start with just a brief introduction to set this study into context and to just demonstrate where we arrived at the research questions that we were trying to answer. So we start with that. Then we will just have a quick review of the awareness literature that's out there to date. There isn't an awful lot. It's an area that hasn't really been researched very much, so we hope to contribute to that. Then we'll have a summary of our study and the study findings. And then emerging out of that, because we're talking about awareness of guidelines, we thought it would be a good opportunity to actually include guidelines. In other words, put out the information about what best practice as we know it today is. So the final thing then would be to look at, well, where do we go from here in terms of recommendations for future strategies? There are a number of different recommendations out there. There are a number of strategies that people use, but they're very piecemeal, and really it would be very nice to try and coordinate this and to have sort of international standards and international guidelines. So let's start off then with a sort of an introduction of where this all started. As Karen mentioned, there has been extensive research in this area, and the reason being, one of the reasons for this is that there are over 650 million primary school children. So it is an issue that will touch quite a number of people, and for that reason there is research that has been carried out on school bag use over a considerable amount of time. And then emerging from that research, there has been some guidance on carrying a school bag. guidance on factors such as the optimum type of school bag, and what school bag features should people look out for, the method of carriage, and then probably the area that has been researched most of all would be the weight of the school bag. So one of the key research questions that's frequently asked is, what weight school bag should a child be allowed to carry? So we're going to have a look at all of those, and the difficulty with the weight of the school bag is given the increasing levels of obesity amongst children at the moment. The calculation of the weights of school bags needs to be reviewed completely, and as we'll see, recommended that it should be dropped altogether. However, despite the amount of research that has been done in the area, there is very limited evidence that parents or children have ever received this information. So there seems to be a lot of studies that are looking at school bags and weighing the children's school bags when they come to school to see, are they complying with the load limit guidelines? But nobody has really looked to see, well, do the parents have that information in the first place? Do the children have that information in the first place in order to be able to comply with it? So that was really sort of the beginning of our starting point. So really what we were looking at was compliance. And we were looking to see, are children and their parent, do they know information, or can they be compliant with the information that's out there? Because the evidence is that they're not terribly compliant. Certainly in relation to the weight of a bag, they're not very compliant. So again, we were interested to know, we were interested to provide some sort of validation that children or their parents were aware of the evidence. So this was in relation to school bag load limits, but also we were interested in all the other factors and features that are part of school bag carriage. We wonder why this issue is raised at all, and there are two, historically really, there are two prongs to this sort of seasonal debate about school bags. The issue is raised probably most frequently on an annual basis as children are starting a new academic year. And the issue is raised mostly by parents and children with regards to musculoskeletal pain or discomfort that is associated with carrying the school bag. And the issue is also raised by parents who are frequently concerned that carrying a school bag will have long-term damage for their child, and they're usually mostly concerned about the long-term damage that carrying a school bag could have on their child's spine. Because people are looking at school bag related pain, we see in the literature that there are two different ways by which this pain is usually established, or the prevalence of pain is established. The first method is one whereby the reported association between school bag use and prevalence of pain is established, but the researchers don't specifically inquire about the school bag related pain. Usually what happens in this situation is the questionnaire, it doesn't ask about school bag related pain, but it's asked about pain in general, and then subsequently the results are analysed to see if the children who report pain are also the children who are carrying the heavy school bags. And an example of this will be in a questionnaire where the question is asked, for example, in the past month, have you had low back pain which lasted for 1 day or longer? And then alongside that, the children's bags are weighed, and the two are analysed in that way. Now, the second method is whereby the researchers actually seek the children's opinion on whether or not their pain is related to school bag carriage. So in other words, there is an element of establishing that the musculoskeletal pain that the children have is actually related to their school bag carriage. And in this case, the question would usually be something like, do you experience pain when you carry your backpack? And this to me is a more valid way of seeking this particular information, because we have found, and others have also found, that there is reasonably high background level of pain in children. In other words, if you were to ask children, do they have pain now, for no particular reason, you will find quite high proportions of them will have pain. So it's to try to tease out the pain that they're complaining of, and when they say it is school bag related, well, is it really school bag related, or is it part of this background level of pain that children have anyway? So what's the evidence for this connection between school bag carriage and musculoskeletal pain? Well, it's very varied. No matter which aspect of it we look at, you find evidence for and against. For example, there is evidence that school bag carriage, that's literally carrying a school bag, is associated with musculoskeletal pain. That is irrespective of the weight of that bag. So you have some studies that say that carrying a school bag will cause pain, others who say it will not, or there is no association. Then also when we look at the association between school bag weight and musculoskeletal pain. So in other words, does the weight of the bag itself have an impact on whether the child complains about musculoskeletal pain or not? And again, the evidence is very varied in this regard. You have studies that show that the weight of the bag will contribute to the complaints of musculoskeletal pain, and in all cases, as the weight of the school bag increased, so too did the prevalence of back pain, or pain in general. But there are also a number of studies that have reported that there is no association between the weight of the school bag and the complaints of musculoskeletal pain. A study that we did a couple of years ago was one of those that found no relation between them. We were looking at the relationship between the different thresholds or cutoff points for school bag weights. And we did quite extensive analysis in this area to try to find out if there was a particular threshold or a particular cutoff point above or below which we could say the incidence of pain increased or decreased. And we couldn't. The probability of pain was similar, irrespective of the relative school bag weight. So children who had lighter bags were just as likely to complain about pain as the children who were carrying the heavier bags, expressed as a percentage of their body weight. We also looked at the duration of carriage, in other words, how long they're carrying the school bag for. And here again, we couldn't find a particular cutoff point that we could use to predict school bag related musculoskeletal pain. We concluded that really the current thresholds couldn't be used as predictors for school bag related pain. One interesting finding in the study was, though, that we found that for back pain, the length of time that the child carried the bag was loosely associated, but not significantly so. So that was one area we felt was worthwhile having a further look. But the weight of the school bag really did not have any association with whether or not the child complained of musculoskeletal pain. So given that sort of background, and given the background that we also were involved in, when we were looking at the compliance of parents and looking at the guidelines, we realized that in fact there was very little known about the parents, and the parents would be very instrumental here in providing guidance and support to their children. So this was a group of people that we felt had been very under-researched, and we wanted to know, well, what do the parents already know about school bag carriage? We wanted to know what were the current knowledge translation platforms, if any. Where did they get their information? And then we also wanted to know, well, if they wanted more information, what would be the preferred platform? And this was with a view to if we found in the study that they were interested in more information, we wanted to know, well, how would they like that information? We were interested in knowledge translation in particular because we were interested in the parents as stakeholders, and we'll touch on this again later on. We were very interested in the parents as part of the whole process for improving school bag carriage, because they're definitely stakeholders in the decision making, and they're also stakeholders in the practical behaviours of their children. We were also conscious of the fact that there are different target audiences here, so perhaps this is something that could be looked at in the future. So a little bit of background about what's out there already in relation to awareness of school bag carriage. We found, first of all, in relation to school bag load limits, we found very varying levels of parental awareness. Some studies identified that parents had a high level of knowledge, ranging from 84% down to 68%. And other studies demonstrated that parents had very low levels of knowledge, ranging from 48 down to 46%. And this was related to load limits. We noted that most of those studies had a binary response to that particular question. In other words, the parents were usually asked something like, do you think the school bag should be less than or equal to or more than a particular cutoff point? So in all of those cases, the parents had a 50-50 chance of giving the correct answer. And we decided to expand on that somehow, and we'll see later on how it did actually affect our results quite considerably. But it is seen to be a sort of a limitation where people just have a possible binary response. When we looked at the parental awareness of optimum bag type, we found that parents in previous studies have been shown to be aware of the optimum bag type. In other words, most of the parents would have opted for a backpack style bag. They were also quite well aware of the optimum method of carriage, that is to carry the school bag over both shoulders. However, the parents were not aware of the correct size of the school bag. So they didn't identify in the various previous studies what the correct size of a school bag could be, whether that was a picture or whether it was a description in text. And also they weren't aware of various strap adjustments and how they should adjust the straps of the school bags. The parental awareness of these factors was associated with school bag weight, and two studies looked at this in particular, and both of them found that where parental awareness levels were high, the weight that the child carried in their school bag was usually that bit lower. So they demonstrated that there was an association between that. And then also higher parental awareness was shown to be associated with the lower prevalence of musculoskeletal disorders in the children. So all good reasons why the probably awareness of the parents should be enhanced. So that led us then into our objectives of our study. The first two objectives have been investigated before, and they were ones that were highlighted in the earlier studies. So we set out to establish the level of parental awareness of the school bag type and the design features of school bag use. But we were also then interested in in assessing the effects of wearing a school bag. And then we were also interested in the sources of acquired information, if the parents had received it, and also the preferred platforms of the parents for receiving information about school bag use. So they were our objectives. We set about the study by designing a 30-item questionnaire, and it was mostly closed questions. 28 of the questions were closed, 2 of them were open questions, and we did a cross-sectional survey using purpose of sampling, and the purpose of sampling we had included schools of different size, schools of different type, and different geographical regions, and different socioeconomic catchment areas. So although it was purpose of sampling, we were doing our best to try to have a representative sample of parents in the study. We got information or permission, from the school principals to send them their information packs, and they circulated them to the parents. The children brought home the pack. The parents returned the completed questionnaires to us, and because they were anonymous questionnaires, a completed questionnaire was considered as consent. The results that we got then were 700 parents in Ireland and the US participated. 444 were from Ireland, 256 from the US. That represented response rates of 64.6 in Ireland and 25.6 in the States. The respondents were mostly female, mostly 30 to 49 years of age, married and of white ethnicity. The main findings then were that we asked the parents, well, what do you think is the most suitable bag type? And they were given choices of the usual sort of bag types. And as you can see here, a backpack was the most suitable bag type that parents chose. So we were happy therefore that parents had satisfactory awareness of an appropriate school bag type. However, when we looked at wheeled bags, we found that significantly more Irish parents had favoured a wheeled school bag compared to American parents. And we also found that the wheeled bags were used and favoured most often by parents who had children who were very young, or who were the oldest siblings. So where the bag was led by the choice of bag was led by the parent, more Irish parents picked a wheeled bag compared to the US. But we were quite satisfied with this finding in that it was the bag of choice. We then asked the parents about the optimum method of carrying a bag, and again, the majority of the parents were aware of the correct method. Again, more American parents were more aware than the Irish parents. And the Irish parents, because of the wheeled bag included as one of the bags that was optimum, the Irish parents, where you see other there, a lot of the Irish parents had gone for a mixture between a wheeled bag that could also be carried as a backpack. But the optimum method was chosen by quite a number of the parents. We went on then to ask the parents about the school bag features that they considered to be important or not important, and we used a Likert scale here, ranging from not at all important up to very important. And we found that the majority of the parents would have considered a padded shoulder strap, adjustable shoulder straps, a padded back, and compartments in the school bag as being important or very important. So these were features that were considered to be important by the parents. Supporting the earlier results that we showed there, the Irish parents had more of them considered that wheels should be included as a feature, and then the chest strap and hip straps were features that were not chosen by as many parents. In terms of the school bag weight limit, we asked the parents what they would consider to be the weight. What should the weight of the school bag be for their child? And we see here that the Irish parents, only 17.8% of the Irish parents chose what would be the guideline for an Irish parent, whereas 52.3% of the American parents chose the correct option for them. Now, the reason for this discrepancy, and I alluded to it earlier on, is that despite sort of limited scientific evidence, there is a European school bag load limit guideline of up to 10% of the child's body weight. But only 17.8% of the Irish parents were aware of this. We had offered the parents a number of different choices, some including weights, and some, for example, we asked them, well, do they think there's no standard amount of weight that for a school bag that would be the right answer? So they were given a large number of choices. So unlike the earlier studies that were supplying just a binary response, our parents had quite a large number of responses to choose from. And I think that partly explains why the Irish parents' knowledge, if you like, of the guideline weight limit was so low. In terms of the US parents, you can see that 52.3% of them picked what would be considered to be the correct answer in terms of a guideline. But with regards to the guidelines in the States, the guidelines vary from 10% for the AOTA, and then the American Physical Therapy Association is between 10 and 15%, and the American Pediatric Association is between 10 and 20%. So the US parents had a larger choice of correct answers, if you like, and that somewhat accounts for that. But again, we were it's a guideline that we thought parents might have been much more aware of, because although it is not evidence-based, it is a guideline that is included very regularly in the guidance for parents. We also asked the parents if they were aware of any positive or negative effects of carrying a school bag, and these were the two open questions, because we were interested to see what the parents considered might be the effects of carrying a school bag on their child. And interestingly enough, the most common response to this was not physical attribute at all. It was developing responsibility. So the most common response was that, followed by that it might help with strengthening the child, followed by that it might be good for their posture. And then we also asked, well, what do you consider to be a negative response to carrying a school bag? And as you can see, far more parents considered that there were negative effects than positive effects. And back pain was the most common response. So quite a number of parents felt that carrying a school bag contributed to back pain. The second most popular response there, or most common response, was shoulder pain. And thirdly, it was that it could create poor posture. And this is interesting, because it is interesting how in the literature and obviously the parental opinion is that back pain is caused most commonly by school bag use. But in fact, in people who have surveyed musculoskeletal pain in relation to school bag carriage, most of them have actually found that it is the shoulder that is affected more often than the back. So then we asked the parents about the school bag, information about school bag use. Had they had information before, and where did they get information from, and if they would like more information. And only 7% of Irish parents and 20% of the American parents had received information on school bag use, and most of them said that it was through media platforms. So here again, we were sort of looking at the fact that the professional organisations, in terms of providing information and raising awareness, were obviously not getting through to the parents. So this was something that maybe we would be able to work on in the future. And although the awareness that we found, awareness levels were quite good, but still the majority of parents in Ireland and in the US, they wanted more information. So they were keen to learn about school bag use in order to help their children. And we asked them about the preferred information platform. And interestingly, the most common answer to this was a handout. which surprised us somewhat because we were thinking that despite living in a sort of a paperless society, we thought that the majority of parents would have chosen an electronic mode. And also given the sort of predominant age of the parents being between 30 and 49, we really had speculated that they would choose an online source. But in fact, it was a handout was the most common platform that was chosen. The second most common was online, and then YouTube. But we had speculated that we might have found more requests for an app or a podcast or some other means like that. So overall then, the conclusions of the study, we concluded that parents had a good awareness. There was scope for improvement, but we identified really a poor level of knowledge translation from the professional organisation. So despite good awareness, the parents had very little contact or information from professional organisations. We were somewhat concerned about the Irish parents considering the wheeled bag to be the optimum type of school bag, because this is not really in keeping with the evidence to date. Wheeled bags are ideal where surfaces are flat and where they are smooth, but walking along footpaths where there are curbs and where there's steps, it's not always the ideal and not always ideal for children. We found, as I said, a very poor level of knowledge translation from professional organisations, but we were very pleased that parents would like more information, and we identified that the preferred platform for knowledge translation was a handout. So this would be something that we would like to look at in the future. We were very conscious of the fact that parental awareness could be enhanced, and we really felt that it could be enhanced through continuing to emphasise the important aspects of school bag carriage, like the broad ergonomic principles of school bag carriage, such as the type of bag they have, the features, their optimum use. And we were very conscious to try to detract from the issue of school bag weight alone. So we were therefore looking at, well, what parents should be. We're talking about awareness, and I suppose it's only right to include a slide in this presentation with, well, what parents should be aware of. This is, if you like, reasonably standard information, but it is surprising how many parents will say to you that they didn't know something that, you know, could be considered to be fairly well used and fairly standard information. So the key factors that parents should be aware of will be to buy a lightweight backpack style bag with an adjustable padded shoulder straps. This will make it more comfortable on the shoulders. And as I said, shoulder discomfort is very often more common than back discomfort. So this will help to alleviate quite an amount of that. I think one of the things that we find is that parents do not buy a bag that fits the child correctly. And this, I think, is a huge issue where the child is walking along. The bag is uncomfortable because it's not the right size bag for the child. And in fact, invariably, parents would buy a bag that is too big for the child. So therefore, it hits off the child's hips or off their buttocks when they're walking, and it's not very comfortable for them. The parents should also look for a padded back and a waist strap if possible. Most of the designs of school bag don't have waist straps or hip straps, but they would be advisable because they help to distribute the load across the hips as well as the shoulders. In keeping with sort of good ergonomic advice, they should put the heaviest items close to the back, because this puts the load as close to the body's centre of gravity as possible, and therefore the amount of leverage is decreased. The child should be advised to wear the bag on their back with the straps on both shoulders. Again, this is very important as it helps to distribute the weight across both shoulders. Unlike a sort of a trend that I think a lot of of school children adapt, and that is to wear the bag on one shoulder, and this certainly will have effects on their posture, turning them to one side, and may also cause some shoulder pain. I think something which people often don't adhere to would be the next two pieces of guidance, and one would be to carry only what you have to. I think there does need to be some sort of level of monitoring. The children can monitor themselves, the parents can help with the monitoring, and the teachers can help to monitor what's in the child's school bag and to only carry what they have to. In other words, only put in the books or whatever is required for that particular day. It does require a little bit of organisation, but it is one of those skills that I feel if the children learnt it at that stage, they could then transfer that skill through to adulthood. And then the next one would be that they should carry the school bag only when they have to. In other words, minimise the amount of carrying that you do, and only put on your school bag at the last moment when you're about to walk with it. And if you know you're going to have a delay waiting for a bus or waiting for a lift or something, put the school bag down somewhere and then pick it up and put it on again. So this would tie in very much with what we were looking at earlier about duration, and the duration of carriage. So a longer duration of carriage can have an association with some back pain, but basically you should really just carry it whenever you have to. So don't carry it unnecessarily. And then finally, avoid swinging the bag around when you're putting it on your back. You see a lot of children doing this, and this just creates a bit of this creates torsion, very often combined with flexion in the spine. So twisting and bending of the spine at the same time, and they're not good activities for the spine. So they would be the sort of basic guidance I think that we would provide to parents. So finishing up then in terms of the recommendations. So out of all of that, what sort of recommendations would we have? Well, I think firstly, I think there is scope to increase awareness of basic ergonomic principles of lifting and carrying school bags. I feel that rather than having a sort of list for parents of what they could or shouldn't do, I think we should probably adapt a sort of a different approach. Whereby we give them the information that they need, and then they do a sort of their own risk assessment. And this applies to children and to parents, that they can then do a risk assessment of the factors, and they can apply good ergonomic principles to them carrying the bag, instead of getting bogged down in particular issues. And the particular issue I'm thinking of course, will be the actual weight of the bag. So they need to look at all of the other factors as well. I also feel that given what we were talking about earlier about increased levels of obesity in children, increased sedentary behaviour in children as well, I think walking to school with a school bag could be contributed as a physical activity, could be considered to be a physical activity, and it could contribute considerably to some children's overall exercise in the day. As you know, children are required to have 60 minutes of physical activity a day, and walking to and from school could become part of that physical activity. And I do think it's a very important factor in the context of today's very sedentary lifestyle for our children. The third recommendation would be a knowledge transfer to a wider range of stakeholders. I've mentioned already today parents and teachers and children, but I also feel that we could transfer the knowledge about school bag carriage and optimum features on school bags to school bag manufacturers, to retailers, and also to the policy makers who are going to decide on curricula and timetables and things like that. So all of those people have a role to play in this particular area. I also firmly believe that we should recommend that people promote local, collaborative, multifactorial solutions. I don't think there is a one-size-fits-all solution to the issue of school bags, and it will crop up time and time again where people wonder what would be the best thing for them to do. I would think what we should do is empower them with the information that they need, and then let them work on local collaborative solutions, because what will suit one school or one particular class even within a school may not suit somebody else. It also allows people, you also therefore strengthen their adherence to any policy they have, because if you develop a strategy and if you use a self-management approach in that strategy, and provide greater autonomy to the parents and the teachers and the children, you will therefore empower them to develop strategies to help to improve the adherence to the advice. So I think, just to reiterate, I do feel that the emphasis of weight of school bags, I think we need to limit the emphasis that we have on weights of school bags, and I think that we need to look at collaborative ways of making parents, teachers and children aware of all of the other ergonomic principles of lifting and carrying, and I think that that will help to address the issue of school bag carriage. Finally, I'd like to acknowledge the parents, the teachers and the children and the school principals who really were very cooperative with this study. Also, there were a number of research assistants who helped Karen and myself in carrying out this particular project, and also co-authors of the paper on which this presentation is based. I'd like to acknowledge and to thank all of them, without whom this wouldn't have been possible. Thank you very much.
Sarah, thank you so much for this really interesting presentation. I try to view it more as an outsider rather than a co-investigator with you. And every time I hear it over and over again, it's really exciting, because I think that there is quite a bit of information that was gathered from the study that we can use to make a difference. Now, our attendees haven't posted any questions, but I hope they will. Please type your questions into the chat box. So, Sarah, one of the things that we found in the study was how parents want information delivered to them. And briefly, you mentioned maybe using a podcast might be helpful. What are your thoughts about that in Ireland? Do you think that that would be something that parents might listen to?
I mean, I have to admit I was surprised. We had choices of apps and podcasts, and the parents still seem to choose a handout over and above those. So I'm not sure. I mean, that's what we had speculated would have been the first choice, and you would have thought that that's where they might have sought more information. But maybe there are so many podcasts, maybe there are so many apps for different things that maybe parents are looking for something else. Maybe they like to have something concrete in their hand that they could look at time and again. I think the problem maybe with some of the other the technology for guidelines is that perhaps they have to go and search it specifically, and perhaps they consider that a handout is something that would be sort of ready to hand, if you like, and that they would find it very easily. But it was a surprising finding. We did expect them, particularly given the age range of the parents, we did expect that to be one of the options, but some of the parents did choose it.
Yes, it is interesting, and we actually have a question from Sue. And Sue, where are you from? If you can type that in, that would be great. She wrote this as a question. I may have missed this, but please could you point us in the direction of existing guidelines for backpacks? This would be useful for people using backpacks for work as well. And Sue's in the UK. Hi, Sue. You've attended other Learn at Work webinars, and we're happy that you're here today. So, Sarah, you mentioned that there are guidelines in Europe. Was that right? Or
yeah, Europe and
maybe go over that a little bit.
Yeah, well, there are. I mean, if we're talking about weight limit guidelines, there is a 10% of the child's body weight is a weight limit guideline in Europe and in Australia. But increasingly more people, including ourselves, are discovering that that is not an appropriate, it's not an appropriate way to estimate a guideline. It's definitely not appropriate in children, because a heavier child is not necessarily more physically capable than a lighter child. So basing guideline weights on body weight is not an appropriate way to go. And as I said, I would actually have a preference for just eliminating that whole guideline altogether and use a more general guideline of only carry what you have to. I don't think it's possible to establish a guideline that's suitable for all people. There isn't a one-size-fits-all guideline. Sue has asked in particular about adults, and a lot of the guidelines that are presented there for children would also follow for adults. I think adults, if they were carrying a heavy load, again, carrying it in a backpack with 2 straps, with a chest strap and a hip strap, would be optimal. Carrying it over both shoulders, having the heaviest items close to the spine, all of that advice also is appropriate for adults. So the same advice really would apply. And it's very much based on the sort of risk assessment model that is used in the workplace with adults. Adults who carry out a lot of heavy manual handling and work, they always risk assess what they do. In other words, they look at aspects of the job that they can improve on to keep bringing down the sort of physiological cost of the job, and then they do it. And this is exactly what's happening here. If we wear the right bag in the right way, only with the load that we want, well, then we're bringing the risk of injury down all the time. You're not eliminating it completely, but you are helping to bring it down. And I feel we should take that sort of approach. It's a very general approach. I feel it's a very common sense approach, as distinct from saying that there is this particular weight and above that you cannot lift, or you're not to lift something that's above that weight, because it's not a very appropriate guideline.
And Sarah, I agree. And Sue wrote back that she agrees that a common sense approach works. And it's interesting because people really grabbed onto the weight. And even as an occupational therapist, having some kind of objective number seemed to make it easier to give information, but there isn't any evidence to support it. So this common sense approach makes the most sense. And in fact, the American Occupational Therapy Association will be changing their materials to eliminate that weight limit. That it's common sense. If it feels heavy, it is heavy. Yes. You know, think about other ways of packing the backpack, or thinking about what things don't have to go to school every day. And one of the things that you mentioned that I think is so important, you know, the physical value of, you know, carrying a backpack that's, you know, properly loaded, the right size, and wearing it as a way of going back and forth to school or to work. As an example, I live on campus at Boston University. I carry a backpack every day. My back, my shoulders, nothing hurts because I carry what I know I can carry without any kind of discomfort.
Yeah, and I think definitely, and particularly seeing as so many people are sedentary in their work, and children are sedentary in their school day quite often, it's definitely an opportunity to do some sort of physical exercise. And when you think of it, if you're carrying something on your shoulders, you are doing some resistance training. You know, you are carrying a load as well as propelling yourself. So there is a definite opportunity to do some exercise. We asked them about traveling to and from school. You know, how they're transported to school, and we got very similar results in terms of the numbers. Around 50% of children both in Ireland and the States, and this is very much in keeping with other studies as well, are driven to school by car. So well over 50% of children are usually driven to school by car. I know certainly in Ireland, some parents will choose to drive, and this applies more to secondary school children than to primary school children, that they will choose to drive them to school because their school bag is, they feel, too heavy for them. So therefore they make them more sedentary in trying to solve this problem, instead of actually trying to solve the problem with the bag itself. So people revert to going to school by car instead of walking. And you know, to me, this is a missed opportunity to do some exercise.
I agree. I absolutely agree. So that's another bit of messaging. So Sarah, what are we going to do next? What should we do next as a study based on all of this? Have you had some thoughts? Or
well, I mean, I think certainly there is. I think there is scope to try to get rid of the load limits, the percentage body weight load limits, and even in some countries they have made it. Well, they sort of put a legal structure around it. That you know, that it is in law that a child shouldn't carry more than 10% of their own body weight. I'm really not sure how that's enforced or how it's penalised. But you know, I think we should really try to sort of get that eliminated. And as I say, it's really not appropriate at all anymore. Though that 10%, even you were talking about the fact that it wasn't based on an awful lot of evidence, but it was also based at a time when children's body weight was considerably less than it is now. So it is so inappropriate at this point in time that it really would be very good. It really would be very good to just try to eliminate that as a guideline at all. And let's focus on the sort of ergonomic aspects of the bag and how it's carried and how the children deal with it. I think certainly there is scope to educate parents and teachers and children about that, just so that they look on it as a different as a different activity, and they look on it as something that has the potential to improve their physical activity levels, rather than being as a purely negative task that's going to damage their spines in the future.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And, you know, one of the things that came out of the study that I think is important as well is making sure that the child in the first place has the right size backpack. So that education, I still think, needs to be there. So, you know, 3 steps: selecting the right backpack, loading it correctly, and wearing it correctly. Still are messages that I think we can get across, either through, you know, written materials, you know, a podcast, a webinar such as this. You know, I think there's many avenues that we can still provide important education.
Absolutely. And I think, obviously, although we found that, you know, the parents favoured a handout, you could perhaps you know, deliver the information across a number of different systems, so that, you know, the parents will have different opportunities to pick it up.
Yes, absolutely. And Sue, who's from the UK, said it would be good to have a copy of the slide with guidelines on the best way to carry. And Sue, if you reach out to us, we can give you some of that information. I can give you, I'll type in the chat box my email, and you can reach out to me and we can send you some information. And I just want to remind our viewers that this paper was published in Work. Our research was published in Work, and it's a free-to-read article, so everybody can get access to that if you'd like to read this more thoroughly, and this information is in it. So Sarah, any last thoughts before we close this Learn at Work webinar?
I think, well, really just to, I suppose really just to emphasize that for professionals, particularly, say, physiotherapists and occupational therapists, I think we have lots of opportunities when we come in contact with parents or with teachers, I think, to pass on sort of the very simple guidelines and the very straightforward guidelines. And I think that we certainly should use every opportunity that we can just to pass on this information to the people who need it.
Thank you, Sarah. And I will try to continue to do that. And it looks like our attendees and others who will listen to this, we hope that you'll do the same. And if you've missed any of our Learn at Work webinars, if you go to our Learn at Work YouTube channel, you'll be able to listen to them. We hope you'll subscribe. And we have webinars that will be every month coming up. So check out our schedule as well. And I want to thank you, Sarah, very much for this very informative webinar. It's an absolute joy to work with you.
Okay, thank you.